Today we're going to start our lessons on rates and specifically unit rates along with unit pricing, and then we'll look at constant speed in the later portion of the lesson. And we do have a couple of standards to address in these lessons, and our standards are 6 RP2 and 6 RP3. So the previous chapter, we did some work with ratios, and ratios are a way to compare. So here we have two items, and we have part A, which is 80 centimeters, and part B is 92 centimeters. So we could write the ratio of A to B as 80 to 92, or we could simplify that down to 40 to 46, or put it in simplest form of 20 to 23. And for ratios, in order to write a ratio, you must be measuring the same thing. So since we're measuring length on both of these, we can write a ratio. However, if we're not measuring the same things, we cannot write a ratio, but we write what's known as a rate. So you can use a rate to compare two quantities with different units, such as money and time. And since most of us will at some point hold possibly a part-time job or even some full-time jobs where we're paid an hourly rate. So Sarah earns $23 in 1 hour. So we're measuring her pay and we're measuring the amount of time that she works. So our rate would be $23 per hour. And this is a special type of rate known as a unit rate. And a unit rate, excuse me, compares a quantity to 1 unit of a different quantity. So the $23 to 1 hour of work. So we have 4 examples here, and we're going to determine whether or not these examples would express a unit rate. So if a monkey plucked 4 coconuts per minute, that would be a unit rate because it's 4 coconuts per 1 minute. Mary paid $2 for a bottle of orange juice. That would also be a unit rate because it's $2 for 1 bottle of orange juice. A basketball team scored 294 points in 6 games. That is not a unit rate because we don't have 1 point and we also don't have 1 game. And number 4, Douglas reads 3 books in a week. And that is also a unit rate because Douglas reads 3 books in 1 week. So now we're going to move on to expressing a unit rate. So if Nick fills 24 bottles in 8 minutes, we want to know what rate are the bottles being filled with water. So we look at the 24 bottles in 8 minutes. And so if we're looking for the rate at which the bottles are being filled with water, we want to take one of those items down to 1. And in this case, we want to take our time down to 1 minute because that's going to tell us how many bottles are being filled. So in order to get down to 1 minute, we would have to divide the 8 minutes by 8. And since we're dividing the 8 by 8, we also divide the 24 by 8. So we would have a rate of 3 bottles per minute. And for unit rates, it is important to label. And there are different ways that you can label. For example, instead of using the word per, you could do a slash and then put minutes in. Excuse me. So if we have a photocopy machine that can print 405 copies in 9 minutes, we want to find the rate. So very similar to what we just worked on with the previous question. We have 405 copies in 9 minutes. If we want to know the rate at which the machine prints the copies, so we're figuring how many copies we can get done. So this time we're going to take the 9 minutes down to 1 minute. So we divide that by 9, similar to what we did in the previous question, which means we also have to take 405 and divide it by 9. So we get a rate of 45 copies per minute. A school buys 2.75 acres of land for a new athletic field. What is the cost per acre if the school pays $275,000 for the land? Well, our key word is right here, per. If we can find that word, that helps us set up our work to calculate a unit rate. Cost comes before per, acre comes after. So the cost that we're given is $275,000. Excuse me. Our acreage is 2.75 acres. So if we're looking for cost per acre, we're looking for the cost per 1 acre of land. And so in order to get the 2.75 acres down to 1, we need to divide by 2.75. And we once again divide by 2.75. So we need to go back into our toolbox and remember our steps for dividing by a decimal. So you start by moving the decimal point in your divisor to the end. And so I've moved it 2 places to the right, which means I have to move the decimal point in my dividend 2 places to the right. And I rewrite my divisor and my dividend to denote the changes. 275 would go into 275 one time. And then all remaining zeros would come up into the quotient. And we would find the unit rate or unit cost of $100,000 per acre. So here you can see we have pretty much the same question. Sports Center buys 1.25 acres of land for a new swimming complex. What is the cost per acre if the Sports Center pays $100,000 for the land? So our cost, $100,000. Excuse me again, for 1.25 acres. And similar to the work we did in the previous question, we'll get that down to 1 acre. So we divide by 1.25. And we do our work. So 1.25, 100,000. Move the decimal point to the end of the divisor. Move it the same number of places in our dividend. So rewrite. And do your division. Now you might get stuck. You might go, well, I don't know how many times 125 would go into 1,000. So maybe you make a guess. And your first guess could be 5. You choose 5 because it's right in the middle. And then 5, when you multiply by 5, if your answer is too high, you use 4, 3, 2, or 1. If it's too low, use 6, 7, 8, or 9. So we multiply by 5. And we get 625. Well, that's too low. And if it was just a little bit too low, we'd try 6. But there's more to it than that. There's more room between 625 and 1,000. So we don't want to multiply by 6. So maybe we take a jump and we go to 8. And when we use 8, we know if 8's too high, it's going to be 6 or 7. If 8's too low, it's going to be 9. So we take 125 times 8, 40, 20, 10, and look at that. It just happens to work out nicely. So 125 goes into 1,000 8 times. We get 1,000. We subtract, we get 0. And we bring these remaining zeros up. And so our answer is $80,000 per acre. A very similar question here, except now we're not buying cost per acre, but we're looking for the cost per gallon. It's the same concept, just some different words. So our cost is $63. and we have 22.5 gallons. So again, cost per gallon, that's 1 gallon. So we would divide by 22.5. So again, we set up our division. Move your decimal point to the end of your divisor. Move the same number of places in your dividend. I'm going to add that decimal point and 2 zeros on the end because we are dealing with money, and sometimes you need to go past the ones place into your decimal to get your cents. And now we do have a 3-digit divisor, and those are tough to work with, as I mentioned earlier. Another strategy that you can utilize, instead of saying, well, let's multiply it by 5 and see if we need to go up or down, is to look at the first digit of your divisor and ask yourself, how many times would 2 go into 6? Well, 2 would go into 6 3 times. So that could be where you start. You see if it works or not. And in this case, when we take 225 times 3, we get 675, which is a little too high. And since it's a little too high, we know that we're going to go in twice. That would be 450. And we subtract, and we get 180. Bring up our decimal point, bring down our 0. So then we ask, how many times would 2 go into 18? Well, 2 would go into 18 9 times. But if we look back at a previous example, we said 2 would go into 6 3 times, but 3 ended up being too high. So it would be possible that 9 would be too high. So maybe this time we try 8 just to see. And I got a good feeling about this. Hey, look at that. It does work. Excuse me. And since we're dealing with money, money does go to the hundredths. So we put that 0 on, and we would have an answer of $2.80 per gallon. And that is all for today's lesson. As always, I hope this helps.